Minister said, we have the immigration system under control, and his Immigration Minister said, my job is easy. If her job is so easy, what's the minister's plan to get nearly 3 million people to leave?
The job that I have is never easy. Those that are on temporary status have the opportunity to extend. They also have the opportunity to use some of our permanent pathways. Otherwise, they are expected to leave.
If the Prime Minister wants to move at a scale and speed not seen in generations, why doesn't he just fire his failed minister now?
On my record and work on immigration, the record speaks for itself. We're taking back control on the immigration system.
The Liberals' immigration minister in question period this afternoon taking heat from the Conservatives' immigration critic over her work on the file. The Tories are calling on the Prime Minister to fire Lena Diab. New reporting from Radio-Canada suggests Diab is getting criticized over her job performance by not only opposition parties but also her own colleagues. Liberal MPs were asked as a result on their way into caucus this morning what they thought about working with Diab and whether she should remain minister. Here's what Nate Erskine-Smith had to say.
I don't think it was handled particularly well, but in terms of the minister herself specifically, I'll let other people comment.
Okay, but would you say she's a good minister?
I've had frustrations with that one file, but again, these decisions are for the Prime Minister.
We also asked the Prime Minister's office for comment on the Conservatives' call for him to fire the minister and whether Diab should remain in the position. They would only refer us to these comments from the Prime Minister earlier today. Here's what he said.
I'm blessed with an exceptional cabinet, and we're working forward for Canadians.
And just a note, we did ask for the immigration minister herself for the third time today for this week. All our requests, pardon me, I can't get it out, have been declined. Probably a good thing then if I couldn't talk. Let's bring in our front bench to talk about the prospects for the minister. Sharon Carr is a CTV News political analyst. She's former deputy chief of staff as well to former finance minister Bill Morneau. Jamie Ellerton is the principal at Kanaptis and worked for Minister Jason Kenney during the Harper government. Sebastian Skanski was former director of media relations to Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. And with me here in studio, Laura D'Angelo is with Enterprise Canada and previously worked in Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's office. Hi, everybody. Good to see you. Happy Wednesday. Not so happy for the minister, I would imagine, Laura. I was saying to you right before we came on air, and the clip from Nathaniel Erskine-Smith really backed it up. The thing that strikes me today is certainly the silence, kind of, the lack of people in her caucus and in cabinet jumping to her defense. What does that say to you?
It says that everyone is a little bit afraid, right? No one really wants to come out and defend a minister who hasn't been defending herself. And let's be clear, it's not great that the minister and the spokesperson on the immigration file isn't out speaking to media on immigration. She was in the House of Commons today, but it's not great that she's not out speaking about it. That said, if you set aside the media strategy for a second, it is a shame that they're not out speaking about it because the government has made moves on this file, pretty significant ones. Temporary foreign workers are down by half right now. Foreign students are down by a third. Asylum seekers are down by a third. The population dropped for the first time in years between July and October 2025. So the Prime Minister and his government are making the type of common sense changes and policy changes that they need to make when you're tying the immigration file to the economy, which you have to. And it's also quite strategic politically. They are forcing Pierre Poilievre to move further right, like we saw yesterday in the House of Commons. That is all actually quite good political strategy and public policy. But they're not out speaking about it right now, and that is a challenge.
Well, I think that's why there's sort of like wind beneath the wings of these calls, or why the Conservatives, Jamie, feel like there is a vulnerability to expose there, because even despite the stuff that Laura says, it's a communications problem to a degree, right? Like, I know there'll be debates about the policies and whether they go far enough, but they certainly go further than the last number of years. They just have not been able to successfully land that message, it seems, through this minister.
Yeah, if anything, it actually makes you wonder is who's actually running the ministry, because when you've looked at what the minister's had to say publicly, she always kind of has this exasperated tone and doesn't know her file. Previous committee appearances, she always had to lean on her officials to answer any questions of substance. And so I think I look at what this minister has to say and how she says it, and it's hard to come across as saying this is a minister that knows her file. And so I think that for the Prime Minister, especially on the eve of a big international trip, is he going to have this kind of drag out for the next week week and crowd out his own headlines for what he's doing on this big international trade mission? Or is he going to move fast and put someone else in place? Because this is becoming a real political problem real fast for him.
Yeah, I should point out, Sharon, that the reporting from Radio Canada basically contended that there were a number of stakeholders that said that she had been much more absent than other immigration files in their communications, for example, with her, other immigration ministers, pardon me, in their communications with her and her office, and in the number of Liberal MPs they spoke to, who didn't provide their names, obviously, but said that they took issue with her performance as well. This is kind of an open secret, though, I would argue, and I almost feel a bit bad for her. Like, if everybody knew this from the start, that there was a communications issue, why allow it to get to this point where you're not even, now she's in a position where you're not even defending her?
Well, kind of pivoting back to what Laura said, this is why it's really important to actually get out there and have these discussions in the media and among stakeholders. Sometimes the silence can actually be worse, and I think what the Conservatives are doing here by pointing this out, though, it is trying to deflect away from what the government as a whole is actually doing on the immigration file. If you look at what the Liberal government has done versus what the opposition is proposing, there are two very different narratives that are kind of being put out there. From the Liberal perspective, I think it's very easy to say, listen, our immigration system is somewhat broken. We have not been able to keep up with infrastructure, housing, healthcare, all the services that immigrants need coming into a country. It's just not adding up there. So there are measures that are being taken place, and there's actual data to show that. Whereas the Conservatives are turning this into a bit more of a anti-immigrant discussion. And it might not be intended, but that is how it is coming off as. So I think it's in the best interest of the minister to, if she needs, take some media lessons or whatever the case may be. But silence is never a great look for a minister or her office.
I appreciate a lot of that spin, but I would say we've spent the past 3 days scrutinizing the Conservatives' position, and there's lots to scrutinize on immigration. I don't know it's possible to argue like it's their fault that the minister is failing to communicate on a significant file. I do, like I said, I feel bad in a way because it's an open secret, and I feel mostly bad because now she's not really able to defend herself, Sebastian, and nobody is jumping to her defense, even though they put her in that position in the first place.
Well, here's the good news, Vashi. You do not have to feel bad for the Liberal minister. You should, however, feel bad for the Canadian people who are suffering the brunt of the hurt because of the Liberal immigration policies. Prime Minister Carney likes to say to Canadians that he's leading a new government. What that means in practice is a bit more questionable because the Liberal policies on immigration have continued largely unchanged throughout into his time as Prime Minister. At any opportunity, Prime Minister Carney has taken the side of the big business lobby and promoted temporary foreign workers and cheap labor to displace Canadian workers and those not just in major urban centers, but in small towns across Canada who are struggling to find work. So listen, whether the minister is able to communicate or not, it doesn't really matter to the Canadians who are out of jobs and who can't afford to make ends meet because they cannot find labor to make money. And I think the sooner Canadians realize that this is not a certain minister's fault or another minister's fault, is really the fault of Prime Minister Carney, I think the quicker their issues will be resolved.
Once again, I have to thank you and admire your attempt at spin, and I appreciate it. I will also have to point out, though, that you're right that the TFW program remains intact despite the Conservatives' call to get rid of it and David Eby, the Premier of BC. But on a host of other fronts, like temporary residence in particular, there has been a significant drop, and the targets overall for both permanent and temporary have been decreased. Whether that comes to fruition in the coming years remains to be seen, obviously, but there is a discernible difference on some parts of that.